Good morning, everyone. It's a very good morning from Thailand. Those of you are attending from other time zone, it's a good afternoon and good evening for all of you. We are very pleased to welcome you all to this very important online session on webinar. We are going to start on advances in flood hazard modeling. Together with us, we have colleagues from ITC Netherlands. So, our main speaker, as you have already known, will be Professor Victor Jiten. He is here together with other colleagues from ITC Netherlands. So, it's a great pleasure and also an honor to actually host and moderate this session. My name is Mohammad Zakir Hussain. I'm known as Zakir. I work for AIT Extension, Application Institute Technology. I probably understand that many of you probably know and familiar with AIT, but those of you who are not very much familiar, let's give a very brief introduction about AIT. AIT is well known as an international intergovernmental institute for higher learning. We are 65 years old right now, and we are actually mandated for graduate education, and this graduate education is actually delivered by our schools. So under AIT, we have 3 schools: the School of Engineering and Technology, the School of Environment, Resource and Development, and the School of Management. Other than these 3 schools, we have also AIT Extension, GIC, and AIT Solutions, and other centers. We call them as outreach center. And these centers are basically working on non-degree professional training and capacity building, research and consulting, and advisory and technical services. So with that, let me also inform you that this is an online session. We are coordinating jointly, which is actually AIT Extension together with GIC, the Geoinformatics Center at AIT. And I'm fortunate to have our colleagues from GIC led by Dr. Manju Pasarika, who is the Executive Director of GIC. So with that, once again, I'd like to welcome you all to this online session. Let me just briefly talk about the schedule, the brief schedule that we have over an hour time or 1.5 hour time that we are going to actually cover. So this is an introduction session we have started with. After the introduction session, we will have Dr. Manju Pasarika to provide a welcome and opening message, and then of course Dr. Manju Pasarika will introduce our respected speaker today, Professor Victor Jiten, and then Professor Victor Jiten will start his session, which will probably go from 30 minutes to 40 minutes. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session. So with that, I think I'd like to now request Dr. Manju Pasarika, Executive Director of GIC, to provide few key information about this session, and also introduce your center, and mostly introduce our speaker. Over to you.
Thank you, Zakir. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be part of this important webinar. And as you know, this is member disasters and we get statistics. 80% of the disaster is certification. So that can be caused by regulators, it can be caused by cyclones, understanding resources. And many of these, there are a lot of advances in job like this, several and this, and many of the governments are getting interest on this area of reduce losses and revenues. Particularly, all the investment, look at this around 100 years, and suddenly around this this was destroyed. So it is important that we understanding this list of this plant and how to mitigate or prevent or reduce also exists the individual. And we are very fortunate to have Professor Victor from ITC in the Netherlands. ITC and our center, because I think 20 years,
Exactly.
and in this collaboration, we have worked in many countries. We work in Canadian Islands, and then now all of our delays we are putting in market so release changes and where the open source tool and it will be used by everybody given our 30%. So this will be also one of our collaboration collaboration there. So also talk about some of this tools that is good and very fantastic tools. Getting the full potential in and then here the MSc degree, MSc physical geography on Ukraine University and also PhD in geography university in 1994. And we also working as I know in many tools development, particularly its interest is on soil and also they work in the bioengineering. So involving the prestigious institute in France, on iron knowledge, and very develop this soil using tools. So with this background, I did not like take more time and I
Okay. Thank you very much. Is my voice clear for everybody? So welcome everyone online. We have a Q&A session afterwards. I'm happy to share this presentation for everyone. So that's also, you can look at it afterwards. There are some, like Dr. Manzoul says, we have worked a long time together and we developed tools together. And some of the references for these tools and online addresses are in the PowerPoint, so you can find them. It's called Advances in Multi-Hazard Modeling, and I hope with this series of slides, I show a little bit the progress that we had in our collaboration with AIT and the thinking behind it to go from single hazard modeling, like flood modeling, to more multi-hazard modeling, because we are confronted with what you see on the picture here. This was in one of the Caribbean islands, Dominica, which was hit by a hurricane, a tropical cyclone. And you don't only see the results of a flood, but there's a massive amount of debris and rocks and sediment that is also very destructive. So, and at the same time, the people living here, they are faced with multiple hazards at the same time. The wind may destroy their roofs. They have landslides all around them. And they are faced with floods and debris flows. So we said, we have to advance our tools and our technologies to address better what is happening on the ground. And that's what this presentation is about. I will give a brief introduction in hazards and risk, because I don't know all of you, whether you have that background. Some of you will know this, and for others it may be a bit new. So let's start really at the... So just very general, we all know that disasters are increasing. You can find a lot of the statistics about that online. There is Our World in Data, which always amasses global statistics. And you see clearly that all of the disasters in numbers have increased, especially the ones that are related to climate and hydrology. And then, of course, the more geophysical disasters like earthquakes and volcanism and so on, they sort of are... You see also a slight increase in that, which is interesting because earthquakes have nothing to do with climate. And one of the questions is, what is now the reasons for this increasing trends? And when I ask that to my students or to people, they always say climate change. And obviously that is indeed one of the big drivers. You see here a very general graph about climate change. The world policies are constantly talking about, let us try to keep the temperature on the planet to 1.5 or 2 degrees rise. But in reality, we have completely passed that point already. if we now implement all our policies that we aim to implement, we will still have a rise of 3 degrees more or less. And this pie chart that you see there, so to the right, the graph is this increase in policy with its uncertainties, what kind of, is our best guess from the IPCC, what the rise in temperature will be. But if we want to keep that rise, we will always have a rise in temperature with all the associated problems. But if we want to keep it at 1.5 degrees, the effort will be tremendous. And I don't think we are capable or even willing to do that. At the same time, and that's what the pie chart is about, yesterday we had a whole session about food security. We have many more people on the planet that we need to feed and that also are vulnerable, because it's also one of the big drivers that we tend to forget in the face of climate change. But at the moment, we have 8 billion people on the planet, and at the end of the century, we'll have about 10.5 billion, which means that we need to increase our effort for food security, which then is counterproductive to climate change, because food production is about 1/4 of all our climate change inducing gases, let's say, the greenhouse gases. But other than that, in the context of disasters, more people also means more vulnerability. These people often live along the coast. They go live in mountainous areas, along rivers. There's still an increase in poverty. So when you have an increase in population, you also increase the vulnerability, the general problem. So even if we would not have climate change, we would still have an increase in disasters. And that's why you also see an increase in the effects of earthquakes, simply because our vulnerability is increasing. And to bring that together, there's a famous picture that everybody in disaster risk management knows. It combines to the left in dark blue the hazards, which is our terminology for all the processes that cause problems, disasters. And when they overlap in time and space with something that is vulnerable, ourselves as people, but also all the physical, like let's say the houses, the infrastructure, but also things like nature reserves, everything that has a certain vulnerability. And if that overlaps in space and time, there is an exposure. So if these three come together in one location, you have a disaster. And maybe the easiest thing to think about in risk is the potential impact of a disaster. And then these big titles that you see to the left and the right are the big processes that influence these three processes that overlap. To the right, you have disaster risk management, prevention, preparedness, adaptation, mitigation. That is what we do in response. But we also change our environment. There's population growth, there's land use change, urbanization, climate change, and all these things increase our hazard. So it's not only an increase I'm talking about to the future, it also becomes more and more complex. We are not just victims of disaster, we also influence a lot of our environment. And that means, and that's maybe the purpose of this talk, the tools we use and we develop together with AIT, they have to be able to address more and more complexity. Where you could run typically a flood model a number of years ago, these days you have to go much more into combined hazards, floods, landslides, debris flows, earthquake or landslides related to earthquakes, all kinds of multi-hazards problems that we have. So I'll go along that line. I'll give you a single hazard flood example of the city of Kampala in Uganda, a project that we did and the software that we developed. Then go on to multi-hazard risk, which the example of the Caribbean island Dominica. Then I'll talk one of our latest developments called Fast Flood, developed by my colleague, Dr. Bastiaan van der Bout. And that is something very interesting also in relation to our work about risk changes that Dr. Manzoor mentioned. And I have here the Paratus project, but I must apologize because I didn't include any slides about that, but it brings a number of multi-hazard risk things together. And then there is many more developments here that we are doing at ITC. There's a lot of machine learning going on, and there are big advances in that. We have a lot of meteorological efforts because we realized that when you do hazard modeling, you often need things like a certain amount of rainfall with a probability, the 1 in 10 year storm, a 1 in 20 year storm. And the way we construct these events is really getting outdated. And so we have a whole research going on to get more realistic event reconstructions based on satellite imagery of rainfall. Then there's an earthquake, wave propagation, and landslide research going on. And where this is going is compound hazards with drought after flood or flood after drought. What happens if people experience one and the next year they experience something else? How is their resilience? How is that changing? But that's too much to show all in one presentation. And so I invite you, if you want to look further at the ITC website for information about it, or contact the persons that are shown here. So to start in the beginning, as Dr. Manzoor said, my origin is in soil erosion, and we developed a model called LISAM already in 1992 for the Dutch government to do soil conservation analysis for farmers in the south of the Netherlands. And gradually over time, this model expanded to do much more. So this is it was developed from before Windows. So for the people who are a bit younger online, this is maybe a time they don't remember. So over time, OpenLISAM became first a Windows, then an open source code. You can find it on GitHub. And it is now also available on Unix and so on. So there's a lot of technology development during this period. At some point, we did a flood research for UN Habitat in Kampala, and we added all flow became 2D flow. So everything was considered flooding, also the runoff. And then we involved a number of urban processes, how to deal with urbanized areas. Then landslides were included and debris flows. And then we added groundwater flow and evapotranspiration. So it became from an event-based model, it became more a continuous model. And then because we realized you need an enormous amount of data to run such a model, and sometimes to create a database, it takes days and days of GIS efforts. We created an automatic database tool that creates the database for you. And you would be able to create a database in half a day and then start modeling. So that is also, and all that is freely available on GitHub. And then we are now moving into detailed soil moisture modeling because with a cooperation with Wageningen, they are looking at the effect of pesticides in runoff and erosion for rural areas, so pollution. And one of the things we are really keen to research, and that we also do together with institutes in Bangkok and also with AIT, that is about the greening of cities, terminology like sustainable urban drainage systems or sponge city, and that is to focus on all kinds of techniques to make urban areas more resilient for flooding. So that's our latest direction we are going into. So it's a whole list of development. And the interesting thing is, it started as an erosion model and that became a flood model. And so it becomes very complete in its hydrology, while most flood models that you find in the world started with flooding and are only now adding soil hydrology and erosion and landscape features. And for those that have a background in geomorphology, we came the other way around. And that means we have now an extremely complete tool that is, it's not entirely unique in the world, but it is fairly unique in the sense that it can do so many processes. And it's free and open source, so that always helps for the user base. Okay, enough about that. Just an overview of what the model can do. To the right, you see the dark blue part is all the soil hydrology and the surface hydraulics, so the flow and everything that happens in the soil and the groundwater. So that is sort of your landscape. You know this typical block diagram of a landscape. Then in the center, the red is all the soil erosion, transport, and sedimentation of sediments in flow, fine sediments. And then latest we added, it's called LISAM hazard, we added all the landslides and the soil slope stability and debris flow, mud flow processes. So all in all, and what is interesting, these are not separate modules, but they all work together. So if you would have a landslide that blocks a river, then automatically the model will start creating a flood because the landslide blocks the water flow. So these processes now interact. And that is one of the things we are very interested in because that's also what happens in reality. Just a little bit of the technology for those who are interested in that. The whole soil water balance, there are different versions of what you can do. You can have 2 or 3 layers in the soil or multiple layers. So there are many choices in the model. All the overland flow is 2D, so it's a dynamic wave solution, but a very fast one, parallel processing. All the channel and river flow is kinematic wave, is 1D, and the river can overflow. So you see in the block diagram sort of the sequence of processes that are simulated. And what makes the model quite versatile is that from the start, from 1992 onward, it was one of the first models that was completely integrated into a GIS. It's all raster based, and we said we don't want to be stuck to a specific grid cell size. And so all the elements in the landscape and in the soil are given as a percentage of a grid cell. So the model would know that 10% of a grid cell is a road, and another 20% is a building, and then you have 50% of vegetation, and the rest is bare soil, and there may also be a channel somewhere in the grid cell. And then it combines all this data into one hydrological response. And typically the model is used from grid cell sizes. If you do very detailed work, say 1 square meter, but then you are modeling maybe 1 agricultural field or 1 slope. But we've also done simulations of cells that are 200 meter by 200 meters, and then we tackle basins of 4,000 or 5,000 square kilometers. So there's a whole range of spatial scales that you can tackle. And to the right, you see some of the variables that you need. An example of the urbanization that we put in, we specifically targeted cities like you find often in Africa, also in Asia, with large sprawling areas like 1-story buildings with iron roofs that are all contributing to erosion and to runoff and to flooding. And also we target specifically at ITC, there's a whole series of research into slum areas and unplanned settlements in many cities. But also to the right, you see a situation that you would find more in the Netherlands, where all the rain falling on a roof would actually be guided to a subsurface drainage system, which then takes care of all the urban drainage. And those are the different types, let's say the boundaries that we can do with our model and that we aim for. And there's still a lot of improvement to be done. I'm not saying that we are perfect in this, but through all the projects that we do, we want to improve this type of simulations. An example, this is a part of Kampala. This catchment is about 30 square kilometers. The level of detail is 10 by 10 meters. All the dark grays are houses, and you see the yellow roads. Many of these roads are compacted dirt roads. Some of them are tarred, and the black lines are channels, and the white dots are culverts and bridges. And then I'll run the simulation. This is what the model looks like, one of the interfaces. And you see gradually all the flash flood appearing, but a lot of flooding is caused. Oh, I'm sorry, there is something going in between. A lot of the flash floods are caused by culverts that don't have the right dimension or bridges that are blocked. This is a true event that took place, so we went to look, and then you see that, for instance, this place is a bridge near a market, and this is actually a bridge, and all the stuff you see here is waste that people throw into the river when the market is done. They just throw all the things, all the produce that is not sold and is gone bad, they throw into the river, and then obviously this blocks completely the drainage, and then you get floods there. And so the city implemented a program that areas where people live, every 2 times a year, they clean these things and they pay people for that. And then afterwards they have some a community event. And in that way they try to stimulate the citizens to clean up also the area. Another example of what happens here is here. This is a slum area. People live right next to the drainage channel. And you see here in front of the door, you see these little walls that the inhabitants built because often this area is flooded and they didn't want their house to be flooded. So they just built a little wall in front of their door, which they have to cross over every day, but it prevents water from entering their house. And that also means that this area is maybe flooded twice a year. And that's also, this is typically the information that we also use to check if our model is doing well, because nobody measures anything in the city. There's no flood measurements. So in order to be able to calibrate such a model, you have to make use of information that you find by interviewing people and by looking at traces of floods and looking at signs of how people protect themselves. And then you get quite a good idea, or you see a bit of flood traces on the wall, you can get quite a good idea of what's happening. And lastly, if flooding takes place, you see how it affects traffic. It's not very deep, and then you have a lot of traffic nuisance. And I imagine that here in Bangkok, you frequently have in areas similar situations. So this model is meant to do this kind of analysis. It's not meant to do really hydraulic engineering and design of culverts and bridges. You could do that if you really know how the model works. It's more intended to say, where is your flood hazard? What is causing it? And where are the sources and the sinks of the water? And we found that one of the big uses of this kind of modeling with this visualization, we use it it is a great tool to promote discussion. So the purpose is not to say, oh, there's exactly 46 centimeters of flood here. You engage in a discussion with the city council and with representatives of the slum areas and say, look, this is what is happening. How can we prevent that? And people get ideas because they now see for the first time, oh, but the water comes from the hills and it ends up there. And it's because this bridge is blocking it. So it is a tool for stakeholder engagement. And actually, in the end, this whole project, which was based on flood risk, became a discussion on on water quality, because the garbage in the areas was spread out because of the flood, and it caused diseases, and you had a lot of human waste, and people were really bothered by that. So the discussion also points you to the right directions of where you have to focus your efforts. So just I'm elaborating a bit, but I want to also make this link between, it's not just about the model, it is also about the model as a tool to engage in stakeholder discussion. Okay, just to see a little bit of the output, this was a huge project we did in India. We had to assist in the modeling of 46 basins of this kind of size, and it was all about the erosion and sediment production in the rivers. There is a huge river called the Narmada River, and it has a lot of side basins, so we did a lot of calibration. This is just, for instance, an output of the cumulative rainfall during the monsoon of 2014. The infiltration rate in this area based on soil information, the groundwater fluctuations that you find. This is the cumulative runoff at some point and flooding. The erosion and sediment production, like where is the erosion coming from, how much sediment ends up in the rivers. And then finally, things like hydrographs and sedigraphs that are useful to design your river basin. So the model is capable of doing that. And in the end, a lot of the output that you find is very similar to well-known models like HEC-RAS or SOBEC and so on. It's just that, this model works a little bit differently, but has a lot of versatility there. Okay, so that is what I would call single hazard modeling. It's a flood model. You have a flood result, and then you engage in a discussion with your stakeholders to give some meaning to this flood level. Because a flood model is not a flood hazard model. A flood model gives you a water level, and then you have to translate that into a danger. For some areas, 0.5 meter of water means nothing because all the houses are built to cope with that. Maybe you have houses on stilts or a concrete level at the ground floor. And in other areas, 0.5 meter can be really already a problem. So you translate let's do the colorful part here. You translate your flood level to something like a hazard. This is a very loose translation where you say, oh, if it is frequent every 5 years and it's very deep, we call it a very big hazard. If it is very rare and very shallow, we call it a very low hazard. And there's a rough description here. So but every country has different translations depending on the type of inhabitants you have, the type of environment. In the Caribbean, many people are used to build houses on stilts, on poles, so they are not so bothered with low water levels. My own country, the Netherlands, we don't have that at all. So if we would have half a meter of flooding, we would have tremendous damage. So for us, we have different boundary conditions. Going on, what do you need for this model? Well, the big data sources are always the same. You need rainfall data, which can be rain stations or satellite or rainfall radar. You can just import it into the model. You need a DEM, any type of DEM that's available. We see more and more of this. SRTM is commonly used, but there are many better sources. Many countries have LiDAR. And 10-meter DEMs are also available now, sometimes commercially, sometimes for free. The biggest problem I found are rivers and channel methods. They are poorly represented in worldwide databases like OpenStreetMap. They are not so good there. And often complex channel systems in cities, you really have to digitize those unless the city has a digital map, but it's not always available. So this is where a lot of effort is going. And if you have a natural area, then you can often derive rivers from the landscape. Then obviously land use maps, which we can, for a long time, we know how to derive that from satellite images, land use land cover, and NDVI for the vegetation cover and the surface resistance. Soil information, very interesting. I'll show you later. We have soilgrids.org, which is a database created by ISRIC in Wageningen, International Soil Institute. It gives you, for 6 layers deep, the whole world, 250-meter resolution, all the soil information, the texture, organic matter, bulk density, everything you need for infiltration. So that's a very, very valuable database. Unfortunately, like any soil database, inside cities, there's no data. This is really a gap in our knowledge, and you see a lot of efforts going on there. But traditionally, soils in cities are disturbed, they are artificial, and so they are excluded from all soil maps. And so when we want to do green cities and sponge cities, we have no idea of the subsurface soil maps. And that is really something we need to remap because we simply don't have that data. And then you have the houses and roads, which are often cadastre maps or OpenStreetMap, but there are also now a 10-meter resolution housing density by Google and by Microsoft. So these global databases are really increasing in detail and quality. And you have also quality indication because Google has now algorithms that analyzes high resolution images and then traces housing and building outlines, and then you get a quality indication of that polygons. But in terms of availability of data, compared to what I know 5 years ago, this is increasing enormously. So when we work in countries in Africa where many of these things are lacking, we actually resort to global databases because they are really, really, at least they are available. So you can start modeling and then you can increase your knowledge locally. And because all that data has to be translated into model input, we made some tool that does that automatically. So if you have these 6 databases, you have a map for that, then there is a tool that will translate this into all your infiltration data, your vegetation data, your slope and river networks, and how to deal with the buildings and with pedo transfer functions we use on the soil data. So all that is done now automatically. And our next step will be to do this web-based. So then you can create your database online and then export it to your own laptop. And then you can start modeling within a few hours, which makes the whole hazard tool much and much more accessible to everyone. You still need to know what you're doing. So you have to have some background in flooding. Otherwise, it becomes a bit dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But at least you don't spend weeks anymore to create a database. Okay, I'll give an example of moving on to multi-hazard modeling. We did this, we are continuously doing a lot of effort of multi-hazard modeling on small island states because these islands are small. The total number of inhabitants in a country is maybe 70,000 people. So the resilience is enormous, I must say, but the capacity is low. This whole nation, this island may have only a few engineers that are working extremely hard when they are faced with a disaster like that, and the land use planners and so on. So they need a lot of help. And then, we realized while working there how severe their situation sometimes is. When there is a hurricane, people living there are confronted simply with this. 80% of the houses, the roof was destroyed, later replaced by the Red Cross. What we call a flood was actually just massive debris flows. So people found blocks the size of cars on their balcony. Rivers are completely blocked with, for months they were blocked with hardwood of the tropical rainforest that was all blown, wind damage. And this is simply a street which is covered to the bottom right with just garbage and stones and rubble. So you cannot simulate this with a flood model because a flood model simulates clear water. And this is not clear water problem. The damage is much bigger than a flood model would predict. So we realized we really have to step up our game here because we have to be able to simulate this kind of mess. And it's really complex. So we added landslides. So when you have a lot of rainfall and you have liquefaction of the soil and groundwater fluctuations, you get instability in the hills, and that leads into debris flows, and that might block your river. So this is the work of Bastiaan van der Bout, who extended the model to include many more problems. And he's still working on landslides that are triggered by earthquakes or sea surges, like tsunami type or just wind-blown sea surges, to also include that. In this little movie here, you see what we aim to do and what we succeeded. This type of flow, where you have a base of mud, liquid mud, and that is capable of carrying large blocks of stones, that is the type of mechanics we wanted to model. And that means you do not model water flow, you have to model mud flow, and mud flow has a lot of geotechnical properties. You need to deal with viscosity, specific density of the fluid, cohesion, viscosity. So it all becomes an order of magnitude more complex because mud is capable of transporting these stones because the specific density of mud is much denser than water. So it has much more carrying capacity. And that's why it can transport all these stones. So that is a little bit the background of the physics we built in. Now, this is what it looks like then. So I'll just have this simulation and then pause it. So you saw appearing, you see first it starts raining. You see a lot of valleys have really flash floods. So this is clear water. But in the hills, you see already the red, you see landslides and debris flows appearing. And that is then gradually mixed with your water so that the river channel becomes actually filled with sediment. And therefore, there's even more flooding because you don't have any transport capacity anymore in the channel. And then you have then this combined flow. This is a part of Dominica where you have a lot of mixed flow going on. Then I have two observations here because it is nice that you are capable physically of modeling this, but it is really hard to calibrate. We did calibrate on the observed landslides. Those are the black lines in these pictures, and the red is the simulated. And it's actually pretty good, but there are many areas where you miss observed landslides or where you simulate landslides, but there is nothing because such models are good in modeling what happened, but to say you can predict what will happen with this model, you have to give yourself some room. You cannot claim that with this model, you can exactly predict every landslide that will happen. You see in the bottom right, there were landslides here we never predicted, simply because we do not have the information. We don't have a 3D image of soil strength. We will never have that, and therefore we cannot predict this. And so the solution is that you say, I'm not pretending I am modeling exactly landslides, but I am aiming for the right landslide density in a valley, because that is already sufficient for stakeholders. If you can say, look, when a typhoon happens, these and these valleys will have a high landslide density, then that is enough for disaster management. You don't need to know exactly where landslides take place, or if you need to know that, you really have to do site investigations. You use this kind of modeling at a totally different scale. You would want to investigate one single slope. If you do this kind of catchment modeling, you are dealing with landslide density and not specific landslides. The other message for this kind of modeling is that your hazard information becomes really more complex, also for stakeholders. So it's not just water level, it is water level mixed with sediment, which then adds to your impact, because debris flow damage is different from flood damage. And so there is like you see the legend here, there is sort of different levels of damage compared to different flood heights, but also different sediment contents. So, and that message is maybe too complex for stakeholders. You really have to translate this. So you have to, you cannot just present this. People don't know what to do with it. You as a scientist have to translate it into something useful. But it is good that we are now capable of doing that. Okay, moving on. Bastiaan realized that, or we realized that this modeling is also slow. You are modeling so many processes at the same time that if you want to model an area, an event that maybe takes a day in reality, and you want to model that in detail, it maybe takes you 2 or 3 days to simulate, which is fine if you do some sort of risk analysis, but in order to have sort of in the context of early warning, that is simply not fast enough. And also if you want to discuss risk with stakeholders and they want to know different options, then every option cannot take 3 days to work out. You wouldn't have a discussion. So Bastiaan, we thought about it, and he created a tool called FastFlood. And I will now share my screen with the browser because it's completely web-based, and continue to explain what it does. Let me just find so I'll switch screens. Sorry, I have to go to the right. Let me start at FastFlood. He created a flood model that doesn't simulate the entire flood, but it just simulates the highest water level that you can have during a flood. Because in hazard management, we often use the highest water level as the hazard intensity, as the variable that you use to assess potential damage. And if you only need to know the highest water level, he created a physically based model that is based on a steady state simulation that say, okay, if I have this amount of rainfall and this amount of infiltration in total, then I can distribute the water on the surface based on fluid dynamics. And then I have like an end state equilibrium. And that modeling is extremely fast. It is roughly 1,000 times faster than any flood model. Let me move to Thailand here. I'll just give you a demonstration. Obviously, I hope it will work. It's always a bit dangerous to give live demonstrations during a talk. I'm taking an area next to Bangkok because the model is more, it still has some problems with very flat areas. So I'll just give you one. So let's say I want to simulate this model. It asks me to download a free DEM. In this case, I think it will be a 20-meter DEM based on SRTM. There are 2 modes in this model. If you pay for a subscription, you have access to much better detailed data. So this is the area I do. I then select a number of processes that I want to include or not. And it asks you, if you have a land cover map, you can upload it. If not, you use a Manning's N, or you can even do some automatic land use class map, but I don't have that here. So the more extended version of this model allows you to use the data that you see, and it automatically downloads that. Let's say I do rainfall. I want a 30 millimeter rainfall. I don't know what the return period of that is. You can choose channels to generate them automatically. Let me do that. Let's not do infiltration at this point. There's some other stuff, and then I say simulate. So then for this area, it's simulating the flooding, and it will take, this was it. This was the entire simulation. So by the time I finish my sentence, it's done. And this is then the best guess, highest water level for this area based on 30 millimeters of rainfall. What you see here is a little bit the pattern. Sorry, I just wanted to demonstrate. You can zoom in and then remodel it based on now I zoom in and I have this resolution. You can then run it again and say, I want a higher, I want to run it again for a different simulation. It takes another few seconds. And the advantage of this is you can immediately engage in stakeholder discussions here, or you can use it for early warning. We tested it against true flood models, and it gives very closely the true highest water level. And it is so fast that it can be easily run in a early warning mode. And I'll give you an example of that. So you're welcome to test. It's called Fast Flood. It's very intuitive. There's a help. There are little movies to help you. And it's entirely web-based. So it runs everything on a server and then shows you the results. You can also download the results. And if you explore a little bit, you can do all kinds of interesting things. There's also an area where you can then say, I want to interrupt this flow. Then I'll just make a barrier here, which is then, say, 10 meters high. And then you can run again. And then you see immediately the effect of that. I don't know if I actually do that, simulating again, but I don't know if I did that. So now I would have to test a little bit what is good. So you can also online do some editing, make some flood barriers, see what the effect is. Okay, I'll go back to my slide. So let me go back to my presentation. I think there, share. I have to, sorry, that's the wrong one. Let me just see I'm back. So this is our newest development. We have tested it. It gives very close the results of other flood models, but then a factor 1,000 or 1,500 faster, depends a bit on the level of detail you want. And this is an example of the flood earlier this year in Libya, where you have a massive rainfall and a dam break. And then Bastiaan tried to mimic that, said, I am going to time from scratch. How long does this take me? It took him a few minutes to set up, took him 1.5 seconds to model. And within 5 minutes, if you are used to this tool, you can have a guess of the results that will happen, because that you could do this before the dam breaks. And he tested that against high resolution images of which you see down here, of all the damage. And it became very, very close. So now we are actually into a project in this area where we are testing this. Because this, and people are very interested, this opens really combines this really detailed flood modeling with direct urban planning or discussions or early warning. So we're quite proud of this, as you can hear. Very interesting, and that's what Dr. Manzoul said. We developed risk changes together with AIT. Risk changes is a method that allows you also online to combine both the hazard that I just showed with all kinds of multiple land use types and assets, and you get all kinds of economic damages, different vulnerability curves are implemented. You can compare different risk scenarios. Originally, this tool was linked to full-blown modeling, so that would be time-consuming. We are now integrated fast flood in this, and then you have a really complete tool that, at least for flooding, you can do really multi-hazard assessment. And from what I hear of Bastiaan, he's now thinking about fast landslide, so he will do also the same principle for landslides, and then you would have all of a sudden a multi-hazard assessment that is running in terms of seconds on your laptop and or on your, it actually works on a smartphone as well. So that is really a step forward in our hazard modeling. Okay, I'm a bit at the end of my talk. I hope, and there's time for some questions, just the future outlook. So we're not there at all yet. We are now modeling hazards, including landslides and debris flows and flooding. We are extending that to earthquake-related landslides, so based on ground shaking. But the real advances are still to be researched, because the world is very interested in compound hazards and concatenating hazards, because our risk assessment for now still starts from a starting point that we say the people who are at risk, they have like the normal situation, like there's a resilient society and there's a disaster. But what if people had a flood and then there was an El Nino year and it's very dry and the vegetation is gone and there's another flood? What is then the risk? And there's a lot of research into that. Like what have we? These disasters are not isolated events. We see more and more happening more frequently, and that means the combination of this is really changing, and the starting points are different. So we are trying to capture that. There's a lot of machine learning going on, also in combination with work at AIT, to combine machine learning with physical modeling. There's a lot of advances to be made there. We want faster modeling, bigger areas, more detail. So that is always the game you are playing. You can do more, then we want more. And what is very interesting is the strength and the uncertainty and certainty of these global data sets, because that also opens this type of modeling more to, I talk to urban planners who are normally not, they are a bit shying away from this kind of physical modeling because it's not what they were trained for, but they are now capable of doing it with some training, because a lot of the detailed work is just done automatically for them. So that is really opening up this type of research to becoming more multidisciplinary. Other people are capable of using it. So that's the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm welcome to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. So I see some questions, but I think so. I give the word back to Dr. Hussain.
Thank you very much.
To close this session. Thank you.
Sir Victor. So I think we can jump into the questions, and maybe I will pick the question from chat box first. There is only one question in the chat box, and then you can pick up the question, or you can
online
the question from the Q&A box. So the question is from Siticon, and the question is: with this model, will you be able to develop a flood risk map for a certain country?
Yes, it is actually better at national scale, and we are trying to improve it for very detailed circumstances. And we're talking about the fast flood, I assume. Also the other, because LISAM is sort of the full-blown version of fast flood, so it depends a little bit what you are aiming for. But yes, it is, and because of its speed, you can do national flood hazard at a relatively high resolution. And so it is indeed capable of translating this hazard to risk. You would have to do, maybe risk changes can do that. You have to combine it with vulnerability and exposure. But the hazard part it is possible to do national scale. I must say that it is still in development, in the sense that areas that are very flat, where there is not really a preferential flow direction, so I'm talking a bit technically now, it suffers from uncertainty. So it needs a preferential flow, so maybe a terrain slope or a direction towards the coast, some sort of natural direction, then it performs well. If your area is a flat pancake and there's only pressure, then there's still some improvements to do, because then the uncertainty in the model becomes a bit bigger, and then you have to be a bit careful. But we're working very hard to improve that. So if you are serious about using this, you should also get in touch to see how we can help in overcoming certain problems. But it is certainly available. So yes, the answer is simply yes. I hope it works.
Thank you, Professor Victor. So now the question can be picked from Q&A box.
Yes.
Which is maybe also in front of you.
I read here from Aprilia. Yeah, you say, can the universe for the Rob flood, but I don't know what a Rob flood is. What is that? Or
it could be a Mrs. Spelling.
Yeah. Is it flash flood, or what do we?
I think this is
A river.
Coastal area.
Oh,
Coastal.
we are working on that, because the basis of the model is, let's say, rainfall. So it's the first idea was flash floods, but you have also dam breaks. So then you have a massive amount of water that is suddenly released, and that is now in the model. But that is not much similar from coastal zone flooding, because you have a high tide or a high water level, which then enters the land, and that is also a pressure-based flood wave. So I think that is now being included. But you do need to specify as a user, what is your tide level? Huh? What is your coastal zone? The model needs a starting point, so you cannot just say make a coastal zone flooding. You have to give the boundary condition. Say, okay, I have a tide level of 3.5 meters. What does that do? And we tried that in Beira in Mozambique, because you had these coastal zone problems with a typhoon there. When you have a flood from inland that crashes into a flood from the coast, because the water cannot be drained into the sea because the sea level is too high, then that is quite accurately modeled as well. So then you have floods from both sides. So that is promising.
Yeah, I think Aprilia just made it clear that she meant to say about the first flood.
Okay.
So I think you have answered.
Okay, I answered. So yes, due to low ground elevation and caused by land subsidence, yes. I must say that the DEM that you put in is the DEM that's available. If that DEM does not yet include this subsidence, then it won't be shown in the flood map. Because often, if a DEM is made 20 years ago, SRTM, then it will not show the latest subsidence level. So you have to make sure that the data you put in actually also includes these lower ground areas. And then, yes, they will be automatically included. I hope that answers it. So then there is a question from Muhammad Adnan. How can we differentiate flood hazard modeling from flood risk modeling? Can I say flood hazard modeling is flood inundation modeling? Actually, no. In theory, flood inundation modeling just gives you water levels. So it tells you for this particular event, rainfall, the highest water level in this area is, I don't know, 50 centimeters or 1.5 meters. And that is what the model gives you. The hazard is a step further, because now I am combining the water level with a return period. So it says the 1 in 50 year probability of a flood is this water level. So it is the flood modeling combined with the probability of occurrence. Then it becomes a hazard, because we want to know how often or what's the frequency. And the risk is when you you compare that hazard level. So then you know a 1 in 50 year flood level is a certain map, and then you combine that with say the housing footprint, the roads, the elements at risk, and then you see, okay, this is these people are affected, and this is the potential damage that can be incurred, and then you have a full-blown risk analysis. So what you describe is a chain of a workflow. You do the inundation first, you translate into hazard, and then you translate into risk. So I hope that answers your question. Otherwise, let me know. So next question is about the size of the study area. If you have a large area and and we don't have hourly data for the whole basin, but it's available for urban region around the outlet. What could be a browser? We do so, well, this is large, 50,000 square kilometers, but so what the model can do, you do a first level assessment at a low resolution. 50,000 square kilometers is a lot. So you take, you model it at a low resolution, say 200 meters by 200 meters or 90 meter SRTM. And you use that result to do the simulation again for your outlet part, where you want to have the result in detail. And then it's a two-step approach. And actually you can do that also in FastFlood. There is some tutorial to explain how you do it. So you do a first level assessment for the whole basin on a low resolution. That gives you the input water for your urban region. And with that, you model again on a very detailed resolution for your focus area. So, and you have to always, with any model, whether it's FastFlood or another, please test if this gives you good results, because otherwise you have to tune the infiltration and the rainfall, so it gives you something that is close to your observations. No model should be used in a blind way. So please check, even in a soft way, by citizen science. Talk to your stakeholders. If the model says somewhere I have 2 meters of water here, check whether people who are living there actually experience 2 meters of water level. Because you do need to be careful with this, but in principle, it's a two-step approach, what you need to do. I hope that answers. Then Zomin Ted, he asks, how do we consider secondary or cascading impacts from flooding? Can we proceed it on FastFlood? Yeah, we are working on that. At the moment, not. So FastFlood is a flood hazard model. So it's like a single hazard model. It can include initial situations. So if your initial situation represents a previous hazard, then it would be able to take that further into a next situation, a flood. But I guess this kind of more complex modeling for now would be better to do with a full-blown physical model that gives you more. You can better guide the input in such a model. You can better guide what's going on. But cascading hazards are quite complex because they multiply in complexity very fast. You have we were doing some research together with Dr. Manzoul on the Caribbean islands. We see that flooding is caused because the hurricane destroys their tropical rainforest, and all that hardwood is coming into the river and blocking everything. That kind of very particular effects, you really need to know that and then manually put that in a model, because this is not done automatically. It's too detailed, too complex. So it depends very much what you want to do. If you do complex stuff, I would stay away from FastFlood at the moment, but the development is in full swing, so I'm sure it might be available in the future. And a follow-up question from Aprilia regarding modeling the FastFlood and its components. Does this model also comply with drainage zones? Yes. Again, we're working on that. Urban drainage is possible, also with the full-blown modeling. The big problem is actually to get the drainage information. So there may be a subsurface drainage like storm drains, if we talk about artificial drainage, but you need to put it in, and sometimes maps of subsurface drainage are not available. So the big problem is more the data than the modeling. Once you have subsurface drainage networks, then fast flood is not yet capable of doing it. LISAM is, so it depends a bit how important it is. If you are talking about infiltration zones in cities, that you say, I have zones which are designed to cope with flooding, then you have to, that's possible. You have to put that in you have to create the input data for that. So you would make an infiltration map that specifically emphasizes these areas that they infiltrate more. And I know that Bastiaan is working to do that interactively, where you can simply draw on your map with a drawing tool to create this kind of flood mitigation measures, and then you could do it inside the web tool. So that is being created. I hope that answers your question. No, it does not yet do damage. For that, a tool like, because that is very complex, and I think a tool like Risk Changes is capable of doing that. So we are talking more about a combined tool here that we developed together with AIT to do this whole damage assessment. That is really a one step further. So I hope that answers your question. So that's this tool, this Risk Changes, that is really made to do damage assessment, and that because there's a whole lot of data needed for that, but it will be combined with fast flood methods.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Victor. I think we have two more questions in the chat box.
Yes.
Let me talk.
Please.
So the first one is an interesting one. The question is from Niloy. The question is, how are the machine learning and the AI are going to deal with this special data? Is it good deal with data, big data, and big data?
I think
it's a possible success from
it is a bit of an unexplored direction still. A few days ago, we had in the news that Google was able to simulate the weather with machine learning faster than a climate model. We know that. I know that the Dutch meteorological services are exploring machine learning combined with physical modeling to really speed up. So that is one particular use of it. Because, for instance, in climate modeling, it's all based on atmospheric physics. But because the situation of the atmosphere at one moment in time is a progress of the moment in time half an hour earlier, you can also use machine learning to do these intermediate time steps, and then once in a while you do your physics to make sure it's still okay. So you could combine what we are not the ITC, but what is explored in this world is that can we use machine learning to speed up the physics that is there, because the physics we know for a few hundred years, so why not? It would be silly not to use it. We have all this experience in flooding. And as machine learning is used now, it is used parallel to physically based modeling as an alternative, and it has great results. What machine learning cannot do at the moment, machine learning looks for the best correlation, the best relation between something you want to know, like a landslide, and all its factors at the same location. Machine learning doesn't know that a flood is caused by some area far upstream, because the only way you know that is if you model how the water is flowing. And machine learning cannot do that. It doesn't know that source areas of a problem, which are not exactly at the same location, that these are related to each other in space. That is big weakness at the moment. And in the combination of the two, so the physically based modeling knows that, but it's often too complex, too slow. And so the machine learning in that combination can become very strong when we say, look, we quickly select the combination of data that is best for this problem. We quickly speed up the modeling, and we check that with our physically based modeling. And then I think you can have sort of almost real time, maybe in the future, real time simulations of what you need to know. So I think that is where a big advance can be made. Another weakness of machine learning that is rapidly being overcome now. I talked to my colleague Luigi Lombardo. He's at ITC, one of the big experts in machine learning, among a few others. Machine learning used to be a black box where automatically some result is being produced and we don't know exactly why or how. And now machine learning is advancing into give you additional statistics as, look, I got this result and my best correlation is with this parameter explains the most, and then this, and then this, and then this. So you get much more insight into why the algorithms choose this particular output. And that is a great advance. And also machine learning is now much more able of using time series analysis. So it doesn't only look at a particular set of parameters in time. It says, let us do this. And I take the rainfall variation of the last month. I also take that into account. So there are big steps being made there. And I'm really curious what the future will bring. But we should not throw away 300 years of physics. I mean, that's also a knowledge that we acquired, and how soils work and how we don't have to treat everything as a black box. That would be silly. So I think these two worlds are going to mix, and then we'll see some great advantages there. I'm not a machine learning expert, so I'm more from the physics part. So I was a big skeptic at the beginning, but I see now the enormous advances that are being made. So I hope that answers your question, or that's my feeling what will happen.
Thank you, Professor Victor.
Yeah.
We have one more question in chat box, and then we have to go back to the Q&A box. There is one more question.
Yes.
So the question from chat box is, can the FastFlood app be used for commercial purpose?
For what? For sorry?
Commercial purpose.
It is. I think because Bastian has developed it. It is an open source tool, and if you use it in a more detailed and serious manner, you have to pay for a subscription, but it's quite low. It's not expensive, and I don't think you're allowed to build it into your own tool. The copyright doesn't allow that, but it's also at its beginning. So I would advise you to contact Dr. van der Bout and see how he wants to develop it further. So we are treating this a little bit as a spin-off activity from ITC, where it is partly commercial, partly open source, because that is our philosophy. So when we use it in teaching and for the students, it's free to use. But when you use it in a commercial context, there is a subscription context, I think. That's how we set it up. But you have to contact him if you want to know this in more detail.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Victor, we have the last question from an anonymous attendee in the Q&A box.
Okay. I understood correctly. The values of parameters are manually inputted. Sensors, erosion, change of water elevation. I think he is actually doing that. So what you can put in are either worldwide data sets that are translated for you, like the soil grids, and maps that you want to input for yourself. I think he is working on inputting. I'm sure if I ask him, he says, yes, this already exists. If you have your own discharge for calibration, that I think already exists. So the classical discharge measurements that you need for the calibration of your model, I think he already built that in. I think there is like a stable version and a beta version. So if you are interested, I advise you to look at both, because erosion, I don't know, but water levels and discharge, more the classical calibration levels are already available, I think.
Thank you, sir. There are two more questions. I think we have the last two questions.
Okay. In the chat box, okay.
Interesting. This session is drawing a lot of questions.
Nice. I like it.
A question from Joe Minho. He said that I just want to confirm my last confusion. If the area is low-lying, is it a limitation for the FastFlood to understand the riverine flooding for now?
Oh, yeah, no, that is actually a good question, because it is one of the areas that is a bit weaker now, but is being improved. The method works that it is not just a GIS method, it is a physically based method. So it estimates first a discharge situation, and then it does some inverse inverse physics to get from this equilibrium discharge, it goes back to a water level. That's what happens behind the screens. In a flat area, like you describe, there is no preferential direction for discharge. It goes a bit in all directions. And then reversing that to a water level is possible, but the uncertainty, there's an uncertainty issue. So the water level that you get is not certain anymore. And he is improving that by looking closer. I think there will be a little bit of an iteration involved to zoom in on the final producer. So for the moment, completely flat areas are not so certain yet. I would be careful if you use it and really check the results. But this is an area which is being improved. So I think that so you need, maybe if you want to do that, you need an outlet for this area, if that is possible, where there is a preferential flow direction, and then it would work better. But this is typically a situation which is still a bit tricky. So I would be careful in these kind of situations. And also, it is advised to use a really good DEM, because the DEMs that you can download, if you have the subscription, you have maybe a 10-meter high-quality DEM. But if you would have something like a LiDAR DEM maybe for your area, that would be really preferred, so that you try to have the best input data that is possible. I hope that's clear. So this is an improvement area, but a good question.
Thank you, sir. I think we have the last query from Suvash.
Yeah, it says, for a large area with multiple rainfall stations, when we provide the 50 or 100-year rainfall data at these stations, I believe the magnitude of flood could be much more large. However, when we use the spatial average value, it won't be able to simulate flash floods. No, but you can actually, we don't use the spatial average value, actually. If you talk about the LISAM flood model, we use, when you do have a 50 or 100-year rainfall situation, what you normally do in flood hazard, you have the total amount of rainfall that is relative to 100 years. Say a 100-year rainfall is maybe 150 millimeters. But in order to do a flood modeling, any model, whether it's LISAM or another one, HECAS, you have to, well, not HECAS, but another flood model, you have to recreate a rainstorm out of that, with, for instance, half-hour or hourly rainfall. So you have a daily total, 150 millimeter, and you recreate what we call a design storm, which is the rainfall variation maybe per hour. And that allows you to do the modeling. And that data set can also be spatially variable. It depends if you have, for instance, stations, you could use an interpolation, or if you have satellite data, you could use your satellite rainfall, so that it doesn't have to be the area average. That is simply a choice of it's up to you as a user to provide. The model doesn't know, you have to provide the right data. If you talk about the fast flood model, in the subscribed version, you can click on creating this 50-year, for instance, situation and a design storm. It is created automatically from IMERC, from GPM data set. So that is those are rainfall satellite data from NASA. They are half-hour intensities, and they have an 11-kilometer resolution, and they are available since the year 2000. So that is used to create some Gumbel analysis and a design storm automatically. So that is a support that you get when you subscribe. And again, you have to check if that is conform your experience and expectations. So it's a bit of a long answer, but you are right. But we don't use you are correct. You shouldn't use the area average, but we don't do that because that would not be correct. So you're correct, but we cater for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Schiffer.
Yeah.
I think that was very fascinating and very well taken presentation in the session. It draws a lot of questions and queries, which is very good for all of us. And I think in this moment, we'll just go towards the end of the program, where I would like to request my colleague, Dr. Manjul, to say a few words and also to provide thanks to Professor Victor before we close this session.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a very enlightening talk from the questions and queries from the audience. It was very clear. And I think it is quite, looks very interesting. And I'd like to thank Professor Victor coming on the way to AIT here to deliver this speech.
You're welcome.
And I think this particularly that looks very promising too.
Yes,
Everybody has a lot of interest.
it's a lot of interest, and yeah,
And also you mentioned that probably combining fast flood and Vixen, this will be another addition in CUSA. So then it will be a complete end-to-end solution for decision making. So I definitely look forward to continue our collaboration in future. Again, I thank you, your colleague Dinant, to come here and make this event successful. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot to actually ask the colleagues around sitting up.
they still have.
Okay, you can speak.
Please, or
I think, yeah, they have been also, putting questions online as well. So thank you very much to all of you, my colleagues and our speaker, Professor Victor, and also the participants.
thank you.
Wherever you are joining from, it's really honor to be a part of this online session on advances in flood hazard modeling. On behalf of AIT Extension, it is our pleasure and really an honor to be a part of this. And I think at the end that we like to just repeat the things that you are actually being part of this session, which is jointly actually organized by AIT Extension and TIC, and Geoinformatics Center of AIT. These two are the research consulting and the professional training and the capacity building outreach center of AITs. And we are extremely pleased to be partnering with ITC, University of Twente.
Same for us.
We convey our gratitude to the speaker, Professor Victor, and the colleagues coming from ITC and actually delivering this. We will be looking forward for other session in future. And as you have heard, that Professor Victor and his team from ITC is working with GIC for research and other areas. We will be definitely be interested to learn more about that. And if any of you are interested about what we have been doing, maybe you can actually go to our website and we can contact and communicate with us. My colleague and our executive director of GIC, Dr. Manjul, will be happy to answer queries. And I think this session also draws a lot of questions and queries. If there are further questions and queries, please feel free to contact directly with Professor Victor or through us. We'll be happy to take those to Professor Victor, try to bring the answers. I think with that, we are about to end this session. Probably you know that this kind of session that AIT Extension is organizing regularly, at least twice a month, that we are actually organizing the online session, the webinars on different topics with different partners and with different speakers, sometimes from AIT in-house resources, sometimes from the resources from the partners and from all over the world. So please keep an eye to our website, to our social media pages, to explore and to get the opportunity to attend the future event. And also, if you have any queries about our work, our training and capacity building, our research and consulting and advisory work, please feel free to communicate and contact us. With that, thank you very, very much. Once again, good afternoon already.
Yes.
And, good morning and good evening to all of you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
you.